turn to Romans 11. And so I want to talk just briefly about actually both Israel and the Middle East, because this is really, like Omri didn't share this that much. What he shared was great, but just his call and the call of this house is connected to Israel and the Middle East. And so we've been praying, contending for Israel's salvation, just teaching about God's covenant with Israel for years. There's actually, we'll talk about this when we come back, but there's actually a global fast that's going to happen in May, a 21-day fast for 100 million intercessors for Israel to be mobilized. It's something actually we'll talk about that. We're going to be involved with it and how to do that. But our foundations have been with Israel. And then a number of years ago, the Lord put it on our hearts to start praying for the Middle East. And we knew no one out there. We didn't know any missionaries. We didn't know anyone in the Middle East. We didn't really have a heart for the Middle East or Arabs or anything. I didn't anyway. I didn't know anything. And so for 2 years, we would pray. We have a prayer room. So for 2 years, we would pray for the Middle East without knowing anyone. And then after 2 years, God started making contacts for us, and we started a mission school with maps. And we had our first school, and then our first teams that went into the Middle East. And when I think back on it with our ministry school, our voice ministry school, and then our mission school, we only did it for a year. But it's all young adults, ages 18 to 30, as Omri said. Not just our staff, not including our staff, but just our students. Like half of them are either in ministry somewhere, like in overseas. Half of our graduates are either serving at a church, associate pastors, worship leaders. They're running prayer rooms in Turkey, in Jordan. Now they're going to Iraq. They've been in Israel. And so it's like I look and go, I was just thinking about during worship going, man, it's our joy. It's our joy to be able to raise up these young ones and then to send them out into the nations, right? To do what God's called them to do, and to just help nurture, help support, help build, and then to watch them be shot out as arrows. I mean, it's our joy, it's our delight. And I was thanking the Lord, whatever part we have, going, Lord, thank you for letting us be involved in their lives. To really watch them, to take those steps and just to do what God's called them to do. And so it's a joy for us. I mean, it's hard because I was thinking about this going, we, like people, when I was in Virginia, they were like, thank you for sending us Adrian, right? Because they're like, you sent us your best. And in Turkey, like, thank you, you sent us your best. Right? In Jordan, you sent us your best. And we're sending our best right now, and then we're going to send our best as we go. And it's like there are just high quality individuals in godliness, in the word, in worship. I mean, you name it, they're like the best of the best. They really are. And we don't like say that because we know them, but this is the reports we get going. I keep looking at Milton because I know his son Josiah was one of our students, and he's an associate pastor now down in Northport, and just like we're just so proud of him, young guy, and these are our sons and daughters, and either just we're connected, not just us, but all of us, because we have input in their lives, and it's part of our inheritance of this house, and wherever they go, I go, that's part of our inheritance, into the nations, and so we're excited for that. In Romans 11, I want to tie this in just a little bit here, because in Romans 11, it says in verse 11, talking about Israel, it's Paul's treatise on Israel. He says, I say then, they did not stumble, talking about Israel, so as to fall, did they? Meaning they didn't stumble or reject Jesus so as to lose their calling, their covenantal calling. And Paul says, may it never be. But he says, but by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles. So the Jews, with the covenant that they had, their fall or rejection of Christ brought salvation to the Gentiles. Because before that, unless you were part of the commonwealth of Israel, you had no access to God. Right? And so, that's a huge statement through history. Apart from being part of the family or the government of Israel, you had no access to God. And here, when the Jews rejected Jesus, It was in God's heart and plan from the very beginning that salvation would go to the Gentiles. That salvation would go to the Gentiles. And so in God's story, he weaves together both the Jews, which are central in the sense that they carry the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, and then he causes the gospel of grace, the gospel of Christ, to go to the Gentiles, because the plan of God is to have an inheritance or sons and daughters from every tribe, tongue, and nation as a bride for his son. Right? And so both Jews and Gentiles from the very beginning, but God's plan is that Israel would carry it, and then when they rejected Christ, that it would go to the Gentiles. The Gentiles would be the apostolic leaders until, it says in verse 26, the fullness of the Gentiles would come in, and then Israel would become saved. And so the plan, and we've gone over this a lot, but from God's heart, it's to bring Jews and Gentiles together. Now let's turn to Isaiah 11. I'm just going to look at a few passages. Isaiah 19, because this is part of the calling that God has for us, and we've really entered into this, and is this Isaiah 19 highway. It's what we would call the Isaiah 19 highway. And so in Isaiah 19, starting in verse 23, it's talking about that final generation when the Lord returns and what's going to happen. And in verse 23 to verse 25, he says, in that day, or it's in that day when the Lord returns, that time period, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrians will come into Egypt, and the Egyptians into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. Ancient Assyria, okay, which is like modern day, Iraq, parts of Turkey, that whole area, Syria. And so he says, he's looking ahead and goes, there's going to be a highway all the way from Egypt up to Assyria, and they're going to come back and forth, and they're actually going to worship together. Verse 24, in that day, Israel will be the third party with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, blessed is Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel my inheritance. And God brings the promise from Genesis 12, he brings it full circle, or he fulfills it at the end of the age when Christ returns, by bringing the fullness to Israel along with his salvation to Egypt and into Assyria, or the Middle Eastern nations. And these are the nations that actually surround, when you look at the map, they surround Israel. And you look and go, God's plan is to build this highway that not only surrounds Israel, but actually goes through Israel. And you're like, what's the purpose of this highway that he wants to build? It'll be a blessing in the midst of the earth. There'll be Jews and Gentiles will come together as one new man from Ephesians 2. And so they'll be in unity together. But let's look at Jeremiah 50. Just look at two more passages. If you look at Jeremiah 50, in Jeremiah 50 and 51, it's actually God's judgment on Babylon. And this actually will be the ultimate judgment of harlot Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18, the harlot Babylon system. But and so a lot of your Bibles will say it's prophecy against Babylon, so it's ancient Babylon. And then if you look in verse 4, it says, in those days and at that time, it's speaking prophetically about the days of the return of Christ. And we're nearing those days, I believe, in our generation. Verse 4, in those days and at that time, declares the Lord, look at this, the sons of Israel will come, both they and the sons of Judah as well, and they will go along weeping as they go, and it will be the Lord their God they will seek. Okay. And so let me just pause there for a moment. The scripture tells us that when the Antichrist comes down and surrounds Jerusalem, okay, in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Jesus says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, he says, you better flee. He tells them, you better get out of there. Okay, and we see this in Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14. It says, you better flee and get out. Well, when they do, the Jews will flee by foot probably to the nations surrounding them. And we saw this with Ukraine. Right when the war started with Ukraine, the first thing they bombed were the airfields. You couldn't leave. You couldn't fly out of there. You're like, oh, of course, the enemy's coming. Let's fly out. One day you can, and then once they bomb the airfields, you're stuck. Right? And so they had to drive out into Romania and and things like that. But not Romania, but Poland. And so here with the Jews, God says, when the Antichrist comes, says, you better leave, you better flee. Well, they're going to flee to the nations surrounding them. Meaning they're going to flee to the Arab nations. The nations that are filled with Islam right now, and those that are arch enemies of the Jews, the Arab people. Okay? That's where they're going to flee. And then it's from that place that God's going to call them back. Okay? It's Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. I mean, you just look. It's all these ancient nations right there, right? That are anti-Jews. And so let's keep going here. But when the Lord calls them back, look what happens. They're weeping. They're calling the sons of Israel back. Verse 5. Look what they ask. They will ask for the way to Zion, turning their faces in its direction, and they will come that they may join themselves to the Lord in an everlasting covenant that will not be forgotten. And so they're scattered geographically, they're scattered among the Arab nations. And they're weeping, and they're going back to Jerusalem and to Zion, and they're asking, how do we get back to Jerusalem? How do we get to Jerusalem? And in God's wisdom, He sent His sons and daughters, He sent missionaries and the gospel into the Arab nations that are surrounding Israel. And He's brought a revival. There's been people that love Jesus and the Jewish people. And as the Jews are coming back to Jerusalem, there's a great highway from Egypt all the way through Assyria that understand the prophetic scriptures, they understand their generation, and they're willing and ready to serve the Jewish people. It's part of God's wisdom and His plan. As they're coming back, the church in these nations, that's why it says Assyria will worship with Egypt. The church in these nations will have been prepared, built, and ready to help and to serve the Jewish people for them to come back. That's why He's building this highway. Let's look at one more passage, Isaiah 11. Let's look at Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11, verse 11. Most people know the first part of Isaiah 11. It's about the sevenfold Spirit of God resting. And then it talks about the lion, the wolf, and the lion, or the lamb dwelling, which is the millennial kingdom. And then verse 11, he goes back and he says, then it will happen on that day that the Lord will again recover the second time with His hand the remnant of His people who will remain. And so he says, he prophesies, the Lord will bring back the Jewish people once again, a second time. And then he goes on and says, look at this. Look where they're going to come back from. From Assyria. Wait, there's a highway. From Egypt. Wait a second. There's a highway. There's a way forward. From Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. It's describing that entire area. And the Lord's saying, I'm going to draw them back. And when I draw them back, I'm going to prepare the land and the people and the church. So that there is a network or this highway that's established that will allow the Jews to come back. It will be a blessing in the midst of the earth. It says, and He will lift up a standard for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. And then he goes on. And let's go down. Verse 15. And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and He will wave His hand over the river with a scorching wind, and He will strike it into 7 streams and make men walk over dry shod. Verse 16. And there will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant of His people who will be left. Right? He's describing the same highway, and He's telling us why He's doing it. It's for the remnant of His people that they might come back to Israel. Okay? And here it says, just as there was for Israel in the day that they came out of the land of Egypt. Just like when they crossed the Red Sea on dry land. It says, I'm building a land bridge, a highway, we call it the Isaiah 19 highway, from Egypt to Assyria, including Israel. And it's for the purpose of Israel. But when you start going after Israel, here's what God says. He goes, go and minister to the Gentiles, because when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, then I will save all of Israel. And Paul, though he was a Jew, he goes, my ministry, my assignment is to the Gentiles. He says that I might magnify my ministry, or that God would turn, he would fulfill his covenant to the Jewish people. And so this is all found in Romans 11. And so God's wisdom, you look at and go, oh my goodness, his covenant is with the Jewish people. He's bringing all the sons and daughters from the Gentiles. At the end of the age, they're going to be scattered, and he's going to preemptively send young adults and young people in that final generation to go and evangelize and to bring the revival of the gospel into the hardest area, this Middle Eastern area that surrounds Israel. They're going to respond. The Spirit of God's going to be poured out. They're going to be ready. And then when the Antichrist system comes and they're scattered, God goes, I've already prepared the people for people of the Arabs, for my Jewish people, that there's a highway for them to walk back on. Right? We're in those days. God's bringing this revival. Now, the reason I say all this is this. In these days, it's actually, and it's our joy, it's actually young adults and young people that are going to go into these nations. That's the call. It's the building of the house of prayer. It's really, when you look, it's a young adult movement. And it's the young ones in their strength that will go lay down their lives, that will go and serve and build this highway of Isaiah 19. Other places in the earth as well. But specifically, this Isaiah 19 highway, it will be, when you look around here, it will be our children, right? These young kids, that's why I want them to stay. You know, Rihanna, will be your kids. It'll be our young adults, right? It'll be our young ones. It'll be 30 and under right now. And these are the ones that God is putting his hand on right now. You look at the awakening in Asbury, right? Historically, you look at these awakenings and revivals. You know what comes out of awakenings and revivals? Is a missional thrust into the nations. The volunteer student movement, the Great Awakenings, it's a missional thrust. The Herrnhut, Moravian movement, it's a missional thrust, right? You look and you go, out of the Azusa Street, it's a missional thrust. I look at this young generation, I go, they're a missional generation. These young ones in the room, you're a missional generation. The Lord's put it in your heart to go. You can stay here and serve, but many of them, I believe they're kind of restless in some ways. I go, and they have visions and dreams for more. I go, God's put it in your heart to go. And it's a generation to go. It's a generation to fulfill God's mandate over your lives. And I believe it's these young ones, both not just here, but through our nation and the nations of the earth, right? They're going to be at the forefront. And it's not that we won't go. We'll go maybe a little bit. But we want to prepare. We want to cheer them on. We want to send them. We want to encourage them. We want to go and be moms and dads. It's like we want to be mothers and fathers and go, you guys, it's in your strength. I think it's Psalm 110 that the people of God will volunteer in the day of his strength, right? The day of his power, right? They'll give their strength in the day of his power, meaning as the time draws near, that these young ones, they will be the ones that will go forth and carry the gospel and build churches and house of prayers, and ultimately they're the ones that will give their lives to see the purpose of God established. Right? And I believe it's this generation. It's really what the Spirit of God is saying. You look and God's going, no, He's redeeming the most broken generation. He's redeeming them. And He's going to restore their hearts. He's going to empower them, and then He's going to send them. He's going to anoint them, and He's going to send them. Right? And I believe that as churches in America, we can't hold them. We have to let them go. We have to, especially our young ones, that's got to be the right time. But once they're ready, we have to make a way, and we have to let them go, and we have to send them. And as we do, the Lord will bring others. The Lord will bring others. But this, when I look at the nations and you look at God's redemptive history and his prophetic plan, you go, oh my goodness, that 1040 window, especially the Middle East, beloved, that is the bullseye of the final generation. That's the bullseye. I mean, there's places in South America and Africa, and that's great. I'm not denying that, right? But when you look and you go, what's the unevangelized, unreached people groups of the earth? You're like, it's right in that 1040 window, right? Especially around Israel. When you look right now, it's almost every nation around Israel is 99.8%, 9% unevangelized, unsaved. I mean, amazing. One missionary for every 400,000 Arab. One missionary for every four. So like the size of Sarasota, it'd be one missionary for this entire city. Okay? Those are the numbers. When you start looking at it going, it's great. I mean, South America is great. We spend lots of money, lots of missionaries there. Haiti's great. We send lots of people there. Africa's great. You go, what about the Middle East? I go, what about the Middle East? It's like there's less than 1% of all missionary money out of the United States goes to the Middle East. I mean, if you look, very few people tithe in America, in the church, right? That's a whole other subject. But then even in that tithe, okay, the churches give very little into missions, and even among that small amount, I think it's less than 1% goes into the Middle East. It is so minuscule. Okay? And yet it's going to turn because at the end of the age, and we're reading it from the scripture. God said, this is what I'm going to do. It's going to happen. He's like, there is a revival of the gospel, of the power of God, and he's building his church, the Matthew 16, all through that Middle East window. And beloved, it is going to be our sons and daughters that's going to lead the charge. They're the ones that are going to go, and they're going to lay down their lives. They're going to raise their young families there. And we're going to support them, we're going to help them, and it's going to prepare the way of the Lord. Right? And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a sacrifice. We're going to give up, honestly, and there's going to be a great martyrdom. Right? Because that's really the epicenter of everything. When you look, it might be a little bit in America, but honestly, the epicenter will be the Middle East. And we're going to lose some of our sons and daughters as well. Right? And that's just the reality of the scriptures. And yet, you go, but the inheritance that Jesus will have and that we will have and our young ones will establish and build. I go, beloved, that's the vision we need to have. Right? Because that's really what's coming. And so we're excited for that. Right? I mean, it's a sacrifice on every part. When you look, America's pretty easy to live in, It's something bad to live here. It's not second class or anything. But when you're called, it's like you have to go. When you're called, you have to go. Right? And so I say all that to say, I actually want to pray. I know they want to pray for our team and stuff, but I actually want to pray for young adults and our children first. So if you're under 30, right, it's always the call. If you're under 30, it's, I don't know why someone laughed. Okay. If you're under 30, it's like, we want to pray for you. We want to pray because it's really, you look and go, it's this generation. They're going to carry in the strength of the Lord. They're going to go forward. Okay? And so if you're under, I know we have a lot of them. And so, what we want to do is maybe we'll just call them up and let's just lay hands on them. And so if you're 30 and under or under 30, you can just come up.